Good to be with you again. Last week, I'm afraid I tried your patience with a very long description of my early memories up to the first assignment in Rehoboth. I thought today I'd talk about the rest of the story. In June 1962, I was assigned to St. Anne's, and in October, Pope John XXIII opened the Second Vatican Council, a meeting of over 2,000 bishops, and that would pretty much affect the rest of my life as a priest. When the bishops were going on plotting after a couple of months of debates and discussions, and many were feeling, we're going to be here 100 years and all these documents, what are we doing? And one day it was arranged that 3 cardinals would speak. They were limited always to 10 minutes each. Cardinal Montini of Milan, the first, said all these documents are very fine, but was kind of searching for a common theme. What are we doing here? And he said, I suggest we, the leaders of the Catholic churches of the world, are reflecting on what it means to be the Church of Christ in the modern world. And as he and the other cardinals went on, it seemed to the whole assembly that, now we know. Now we know what we're doing. Now we know how things fit together and how we need to redo all these preliminary documents. So when the session ended in December, and the bishops went home, and a lot of homework was done to prepare for the second session. Meanwhile, Pope John XXIII died of cancer in June, and Cardinal Montini was elected as St. Pope Paul VI, who continued the council through those 3 sessions and then began the implementation of them over the rest of his pontificate. I always remember at the last session, the Mass concluding the whole council, and I can imagine all the bishops having their bags packed at the hotels, ready to hop on their planes and trains and boats or whatever to go back to their home diocese. And the Pope began with the words, "Now the council begins." He knew the easy part was all those discussions and debates and the writing of the documents. Now to translate that into action in every diocese, in every parish of the Catholic world, that was the challenge. 3 other priests and I went to Bishop Heil at one point with a suggestion of how we would implement things in the Diocese of Wilmington, suggesting that all the priests be given a copy of the documents of the Second Vatican Council and asked to read them prayerfully. And then some points were put out in 5 different categories: the bishop's relationship with his priest's relationship with one another, priests and the laity, other considerations. And so the priests of our diocese were divided into 4 groups. I was chosen as the chairperson of the youngest group. And obviously, we were the ones most enthused about implementing the council. We came up with a 27-page document that was longer than all the other 3 put together. And at the end of our discussions, 4 were chosen to go and represent us, meeting with the 4 representatives of the other 3 peer groups and the bishop. The first meeting was held on November the 30th, 1966. There were 8 meetings of 5 hours each, ending in January. And then all of our recommendations were left with the bishop as he pondered them and made decisions on what to do. We have learned that Bishop Heil was a very introverted person, so he would gather information and advice, and then he would go into his chapel each day after lunch and pray for the Holy Hour. And one of the priests put on boards the all the recommendations, and so he would pray over them each day before the Blessed Sacrament and make his decisions, which were announced in May of '67. One of the recommendations, obviously, was about the assignment of priests. Usually, priests had learned their assignments by a letter in the mail, or possibly, if it didn't get through in time, they would read it in the newspaper. We suggested it would be nice for the bishop to meet each priest and discuss the assignment that he was being given. And so the bishop implemented the decisions of the diocese in June and in September with changes. There were now limits on how long a priest would be left in a parish, assistants and pastors. The bishop also approved the recommendation of the Vatican Council that in each diocese there be a council of priests to work with the bishop and advise him. The bishop appointed me as one of his 5 appointees to that council. And within the council, they decided to appoint me to be the first personnel committee for the clergy. For 5 years, I served on that committee and was its secretary. I was appointed in October to Immaculate Heart of Mary Parish. I would prefer to say no more about that assignment, except that it was a very difficult time in the life of the church and in that parish. I thank God that he gave me gifts to deal with the situations. He gave me lots of lay people in the parish to be very supportive and caring, and for the support of Monsignor Taggart, who was the Vicar General, and our new bishop, Bishop Mardiga. Of all the bishops we've had, I must say Bishop Mardiga has been the most decisive. He knew when there's a problem, you deal with it. You don't think it's going to get better with time. No, it won't. You deal with it and act on it. While I had been in St. Anne's Parish, I became involved with a couple who had moved from Chicago who were very active in the Christian family movement. And so we formed a couple of groups there of couples who would meet once a month in one of their homes. And there was a structure to the whole thing. There was a discussion for 15 minutes of some scripture passage, and then a discussion of some liturgical aspect of the church's life for 15 minutes. And then the priest moderator had 2 minutes to talk. He was to remain silent through the rest of their discussions. I learned to listen to how the laity discussed their spiritual life and their faith. A 45-minute discussion then of some social issue, and again I was allowed 2 minutes to comment. Because I was the head of the chaplains of the Christian family movement, in time when the head of the Family Life Bureau left the priestly ministry, the Bishop Mardiga appointed me to be the head of the Family Life Bureau. And that became a much more difficult job when the Supreme Court approved its decision on abortion. I went to the bishop with some suggestions of how we might respond to this in the diocese. And with his support, we gathered a group of people to establish Birthright of Delaware, and another group of people to form Delaware Right to Life. And then I also became very involved with supporting the first of the annual marches on Washington each January. I had gathered all the information, pamphlets and everything to distribute, and I decided I'm going to go down the diocese, stop in each parish, try to see the pastor or one of the priests, and to emphasize how important it would be that we get people to support and participate in this march. So I would go down the Delaware side, down to Salisbury, and then return by way of all the parishes on the Eastern Shore. It's the only time I've ever been in many of those parishes, but it worked. It was a very great success. I also had been involved in the Council of Priests, and each diocese at that time was forming a similar group, and the desire was arising that, hey, we need to work together to communicate, to cooperate. And so there was a meeting in Chicago of representatives from all the dioceses all over the country. And Monsignor John Donahue and Father Clem Lemon and myself were sent as delegates from our diocese. It was decided at the very beginning that we best work as provinces, ecclesiastical provinces. So we belong to the Diocese of Baltimore, the Archdiocese, along with Richmond, Virginia, and Wheeling, West Virginia. And all needed to choose one person to represent them to the central group, and so I was the one charged with that responsibility. At the end then, when everyone agreed, yes, we need some kind of a structure to help us all come together and work together for the renewal of the church. And so I was one of the 27 priests who formed the first executive council to bring this group into being legally and everything. And within the group, I was chosen by the head to be the chairperson of the first personnel committee of the National Federation of Priests Councils. In 1971, then, I was appointed to become a pastor at Holy Rosary. And in that capacity, I began to be involved with the vocation office. They were developing a new system of training priests, which would involve some actual practice in a parish with some priests directing them. So over the years, I've counted up 16 priests of our diocese who I worked with either as their deacon supervisor or seminarian supervisor, or the first pastor for newly ordained priests. I noticed in the recent dialogue, the display of some 24 retired priests, that 8 of them were with me as young priests or seminarians. 3 have passed on already. In Holy Rosary, we began to renovate the church and to install a new pipe organ. When I went in '82 to Our Lady of Fatima for my second pastorate, again, we renovated the church. And of course, when I came here to St. Helena's in 1994, again, we became involved with the renewal of our church and the development, enhancement of our pipe organ. Over the years, there have been many activities to be involved with, including, I believe, I count up 43 annual carnivals. Each of the parishes I've been assigned to has had this as a major event in our life. So it's been a very exciting time to be a priest of the Catholic Church, a very challenging time to be a pastor, a time when we have tried in the best of our abilities to apply the gospel to our modern life and to be faithful to the spirit and the decrees of the Second Vatican Council. I thank God for all the gifts He's given me through these 60 years of ministry, 50 years as a pastor, for all the wonderful people that He's given me to work with, and all those whom I have loved and served as members of our communities of faith. Thank God for His grace, and God bless you and your families and loved ones.